Today, we sat down with the voice of the Wichita State Shockers, Mike Kennedy. We go through 50 years of Wichita State history, spanning from the plane crash with the football team to the Final Four. He also gives us his perspective on what he thinks the upcoming year will be. We greatly enjoyed this one, and we hope you do the same.
All right, we're live. As someone who's grown up hearing your voice on the radio my entire life, it's a real treat and unique moment to get to talk to you. Thank you so much, Mike, for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for that introduction. That's very flattering. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this. So I kind of wanted to start at the beginning for you. So you were a student at WSU from 66 to 71.
That's correct, yes.
We both love history, and that's such a unique time in U.S. history. You know, to be an 18 to 20-year-old man, you've got the Vietnam War, Dr. King's assassination, Woodstock, so many different and moving parts. Take me to what it was like to be a college student at that time during that counterculture anti-war movement.
And you know, when you ask that, I don't know how much any of us realized at the time, just what we were living through and experiencing exactly. But I think most of us, as we've gone on, have looked back and kind of gained some understanding of that. And I've told people, I've had an opportunity to speak at events a couple of times where I said I wouldn't trade being a college student at that time for any other era in our history, because I think it really affected all of us, unless you were just totally blind to everything and just had your head in the sand somewhere. You kind of had to think about what was going on and form some opinions and form some feelings about what you believed. And I think that time was good for all of us. I think it made us all better people. I'll say this, I won't get into all this political stuff, but it's a little sad that I think some of the things we accomplished in that era, as far as coming together from different points of view and things, have been lost a little bit, and that's kind of sad.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It seems like it was such a unique time because that's when people started having different ideas. Younger people started really thinking for themselves.
And you didn't mention the women's movement in there. It became more prominent a few years later, but it was really starting then also, and women were being looked at differently. So there was so much stuff going on. It really was interesting.
Yeah, such a unique period in our country's history. So you started covering athletics during your time as a student.
I was majoring in music, in vocal music, and I had some thoughts about becoming a singer of some kind. I loved sports. I played sports in high school, but it came to the realization in high school that I wasn't certainly going to be a professional athlete, probably even a college athlete. And I loved music. I loved singing, and so I got into that. But way back to when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, when I first discovered sports, I sort of discovered sports on the radio at the same time, and the two just always fit together for me. And I used to go out in my backyard and play entire games of whatever sport and do play-by-play out loud while I was playing. And so at some point, I'd kind of gotten that idea that was something I might like to do. But for a while, I kind of had this feeling that all the people doing that were former athletes, and there was no way really to get into it. And I was in a meeting with one of my instructors at Wichita State, who happened to be kind of a friend. I'd gone to high school with his son, so I'd known him before that. And I just said something about, with all due respect to teachers, and I have a great deal of respect for teachers, I just don't think that's what I want to do. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I've always had this thing in the back of my mind about becoming a sports broadcaster." And he said, most basic advice you can get, but something I needed to hear. He said, "Well, the only way you're going to find out is to go try it." And so I looked in the catalog, and they had some classes at KMUW, the campus station, and I went over there and took a class. And back then, it had a much smaller signal, and so you didn't have all the NPR stuff that they had to carry and so forth. And so the students got to do a lot of stuff on air. And I started out doing a 5-minute sportscast every night at 10 o'clock, 10 something. And we got to do all the Wichita State home football and basketball games, and then talked them into letting us do the City League high school double and triple headers and games that were there. So we ended up getting to do a lot of games, and that's how I kind of got started, and that's how I got hooked on everything.
How cool.
Where'd you go to high school?
Southeast.
Okay, so you were born here?
Yeah, born and raised here.
Gotcha.
Yep.
How cool. So you just jumped right into it. Sounds like they got you pretty busy.
Yeah, I think there were about 6 of us, and so on any given night, one to do color, one to do play-by-play, somebody to keep stats, somebody to run the equipment, and so we kind of did a little bit of everything. And eventually it got to be just 2 or 3 other guys and I, so I really did get to do a lot of games. And I've told people many times over the years, it's a craft. I mean, the classes and stuff you can take may be helpful, but it's one of those things you just have to do, and you get better by the more of it you do, and that's how you learn. And so getting that much practical experience was really helpful.
I feel like that's a good lesson for anybody trying to do anything. You just learn experience by doing it. And
I listened, around here, I grew up, you had the Cardinals with Harry Carey, and you had the Major League Game of the Week, and that was, when I was a kid, that was Dizzy Dean, and Lindsey Nelson was on NBC, and those were some of the guys back then. And, you'd watch and listen to different guys, and I tried to just kind of get some ideas from that, get some feel for how to do it I never really tried to copy anybody. I didn't try to be exactly like any of those people, but that was part of it too, was listening just to how professionals did it and that sort of thing.
Gotcha. So into your college years, your later college years, one of your first stories was a really difficult assignment. It was covering the plane crash involving the football team in October of 1970. Out of the 40 on board, only 9 survived the crash. That's an extremely difficult story to cover. When you look back on that, what do you recall, and how do you remember covering it?
First of all, I can just kind of close my eyes and it's like it was yesterday. That's one of those kinds of things that just sticks with you. And
sure.
There were several of us that did stuff at the campus radio station that got along, were kind of friends, and that was a place we liked to hang out. And it was a Friday afternoon, and we were just hanging out, talking, not really doing much. And periodically somebody would go check the AP wire machine, and you just have this, steady stream of paper coming across the wire machine, and somebody'd tear it off and kind of read what was there. And we had these nails or hooks. If there was something we might want to save for a newscast or something, tear that off and put it up there. And one of the guys went up and said, "You're not going to believe this," came running downstairs, and it was this story about the Wichita State football plane having crashed in the mountains in Colorado. And it was confusing for a while because the very first story that came over, you thought it was like normally the way a story cleared, and then it said, "Do not use this. This story is embargoed. Details are not complete yet," that sort of thing. And there must have been, over the next half hour, maybe 3 or 4 different versions. There was one that said everybody had been killed, and there was one that said a number of people had been observed, walking down the hill. And finally, the real impact of it finally came through. And we started deciding how are we going to do this? How are we going to cover this? And so they decided to send me over to the administration building to see what anybody might know. I think everybody kind of knew there were 2 planes, see if they knew which plane, who was on each plane, that sort of thing. So I went over there, and nobody really, I don't know if they would have told me, even if they knew, just being a student. But they didn't really know much yet. And I'll never forget this, when you ask about remembering, it was absolutely the most perfect, gorgeous day you could ever ask for. And the incongruity of such a beautiful day with such an awful thing happening just always struck me as being just crazy. And I guess it was the same way out there. Everything I've read and heard, it was the same kind of just beautiful day in Colorado that day. So when I got back to the radio station, the phones were going crazy, and I spent at least a couple of hours on the phone just answering calls. People were calling, just trying to find out what we knew and get information. Some of it was other campus stations. Some of it was, there were a lot of calls from Ohio. There were several members of the coaching staff and several players were from Ohio, and it was families, friends, people like that calling, just trying to call anywhere and see what they could find out. So that was kind of the day, and it was surreal. You just didn't. It was hard to believe something like that had happened.
Did you know a lot of that crew personally?
Not really well. That was the fall that I had just, well, actually the previous spring, I'd started doing some stuff at the radio station. And that fall I think I'd done one home game play-by-play, and I'd done a few interviews. So I feel like more than anybody, I'd kind of gotten to know Coach Wilson a little bit, Ben Wilson, and I'd talked to a couple of the players, but I didn't really know anybody well. Some friends of mine, friends now that were varsity athletes then, were in the dorms with them and knew a lot of them really well, of course.
Have you met any of the survivors?
As a matter of fact, my wife, Debbie, and I have really gotten to know those people, a lot of people connected with it very well. She was the CEO of the Alumni Association for a while, and there were some events and things. We've always gone to the memorial ceremonies on the 2nd, October 2nd, and there were enough events connected to that we have gotten to know a lot of those people. We did 2 pilgrimages to the crash site. Went to Colorado and had people go with us or meet us there, and went up to the mountain. And some of those, especially more of the guys who were on the other plane, and in a few cases guys that were freshmen, because at the time freshmen were not eligible for the varsity, and then they put in an appeal with the NCAA when they decided to continue the season, and they allowed the freshmen to play with the varsity the rest of the year. But guys on the other plane, of the survivors, I've talked with Richard Stevens, got to know Randy Jackson, John Hoheisel, and many years later, I don't know how much this has gotten out there, but I think one thing people would find interesting. My wife has a psych degree, but we were at one of the events right after the memorial ceremony, and it was one of the anniversaries where a lot of people came back. And one of the guys who was in that group of survivors came to my wife and said, "Do you have some place over at your office where we could just go, just us, just sit and be together and talk?" And she said, "Of course." And so she went back over there and opened up a room for him, brought in some coffee. And at some point she came in to see how they were doing, and they asked her if she wanted to sit down and talk with them. And she told them she was a licensed therapist. And she said the thing that really came out, it was the first time, and this was 40 years, I think, after the event, the first time that all of those had gotten together, just them, had been together to just talk about how they felt and how it affected them, and coming back to those events and having all those guilt feelings again about, why did I survive? And they hated the word survivor. They all hated being referred to as survivors. And so
Wow.
There was a lot that they went through. And we got to know Jim Radigan really, really well over time. He was the dean of students and still pretty early in his career there. And he said many times they wish they had known, but back then you just didn't know about grief counselors and getting them connected with people that could have helped them work through that and stuff. And we've talked with some that said, their lives, they spent the rest of their lives trying to live up to the fact that they had an opportunity to do things with their life that those guys didn't, and trying to be good people and do good things for those that couldn't. There was so much tied to that. It was just amazing.
Wow.
It would be really hard to not have that quote-unquote survivor's guilt. This Friday, it'll be 55 years since the crash.
Yeah, hard to believe it's been that long. You know, it's just like the recently the anniversary of 9/11. It was hard for me to believe that's already been that long already.
Right.
Right.
But yeah, and Dr. Radigan had said, you know, there were a number of times over the years that he would kind of contact family and people connected to that group to say, is it time we stopped this observance on October the 2nd, you know, and they all said no, that it's helpful to come back and see everybody and do all of that again. And so it's continued all this time.
Where were they going?
To Utah State. They had a game at Utah State. They flew into Denver, stopped to eat lunch and refuel, and then were taking off, heading on to Logan, Utah, to play Utah State. And it turned out the company they'd hired was kind of a cheap, kind of jackleg company. That the plane that landed safely in Logan was immediately impounded by the FAA, and they did a bunch of inspection, and they had 20-some or like 30-some violations of FAA regulations on that plane. They just were not, and the pilots decided they didn't even have, you know, a specific flight plan when they left Denver. It was like, why don't we give the boys the scenic tour? And they've got a map and just looked on the map of where to go. And they flew up basically into a canyon where they were overloaded, they were overweight, and they couldn't climb high enough to clear. And so they tried to turn around, and by that time they were too close to the mountain and hit it.
Damn.
So
I didn't know that there was a little bit of kind of shadiness to that. I had heard that they kind of went down into like a bowl and they couldn't ascend to get out, but
they had hearings on campus at Wichita State. I guess the FAA, and I'm trying to think who else, you know, but holding actual hearings, and they held them in the auditorium of the music building, and, you know, all of us went at times to listen, and it was, you know, they wheeled in Richard Stevens on a hospital gurney to talk about stuff, and they had these people from the aircraft company, just trying to squirm and make excuses. And I mean, it was just the guy that survived, that was the co-pilot, wrote a book a number of years later that was very self-serving and took no blame or responsibility. Just there was so much connected with that just didn't give you much closure or much satisfaction.
man, that's awful for the families. It seems like it's almost a misconception, at least around people our age, that the football program shut down immediately after that, which is not the case. The football program shut down in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, it is a misconception with a lot of people, I think. And they did continue. Of course, they voted. The squad got together. They missed that game and canceled the one they were going to play the next week. And then the team in that time got together and voted to continue. They felt like their teammates would have wanted that. And so they continued, and so that was 1970. I can't remember if 72 or 73, they actually had a winning season. Bob Seaman, who had been the top assistant to Ben Wilson, was on the other plane, survived, and he became the head coach, and they had some success. And then a new athletic director came in, changed coaches, and they went through a kind of a cycle of changing coaches and some scattered success. Willie Jeffries had an 8-3 team in 1982, and they were close. They lost to Tulsa late in the year, kind of a head-to-head for the Missouri Valley Championship, and probably would have gone to, maybe the Independence Bowl or one of the lesser bowls had they won that. So it wasn't, But the biggest thing that happened with football was really unrelated to the crash. I think more than anything else, Wichita State was trying to maintain that 1A level or whatever they call it now, and they just didn't see how that was growing and expanding. Places like Nebraska were putting in huge weight rooms and hiring more assistant coaches and all of that kind of stuff. And once Wichita State started trying to catch up, they were spending a lot of money to try to do that, but they still were losing more often than winning. They were losing to teams in the conference like Southern Illinois or someone that was actually on the 1AA level and were spending maybe a third as much money. And so more than anything, it just got to be such a financial burden. It was bringing down the whole athletic department, and that's why they made the decision.
Gotcha. So in 1980, you became the full-time voice of the Shockers.
That is correct.
And the 45 years since, you've had some amazing moments. The baseball team winning the College World Series in '89, the 2013 Final Four team. We obviously saw that, but I wanted to ask you about the '89 World Series championship team. Is there anything that you remember that really sticks out to you about that moment?
Oh yeah, there was a lot. That was a really, really good team from the beginning. I think they lost their first game at Arkansas, like in February, and Arkansas ended up being in the World Series also. Then won like 18 in a row or 20 in a row or something like that. And then they started having some significant injuries. Jeff Bonaquista, who was the starting right fielder, came in to score on a wild pitch, and the catcher decided last minute to throw to the plate too late, hit him in the knee, broke his kneecap, so he went out. Bryant Winslow, the first baseman, had like a stress fracture in his arm. He continued, or in his leg, sorry. He continued to play. Mike Lansing, who was an All-American shortstop, were taking batting practice before the start of the regional at Fresno, and his back went out, and he was done for the postseason. And so they'd gone through all of that, and they lost in the championship game of the Missouri Valley Conference tournament. They got in as an at-large, but I'm pretty sure on the selection show it was the last bracket that they showed that they got in. They weren't like the last team in, but you had to sit and wait that long to make sure. And then at Fresno, they won. I can't remember if they won once or twice, but they were one of the last two undefeated teams. They lost to Michigan, and then they had to turn around in about 30 minutes and play Fresno State, that was the host team and had like 3 major leaguers on their team, and won that, and then had to come back and beat Michigan twice to win the regional title, and did that and went to Omaha, and then lost to Florida State in the second round winners bracket, had to come back through the losers bracket, had to beat Florida State twice to get to the finals. So there was so much that went into that. And the thing that I remember most from all of that, after the championship game, Greg Brummett struck out a pinch hitter to end the championship game. And we went to a break, and we came back and started to recap. And Casey Scott was working with me then. And I started just kind of going over everything that had happened and what that team had been through. And I choked up. I started to lose it. And Casey recognized, and he jumped in, and then he started to choke up. And by then I'd kind of recovered and took it back. But in all these years, 50-plus years of broadcasting sports, I have never, ever had that happen any other time or anything close to it. It was just so unique, but it all just kind of hit you all at once.
It's such a huge moment.
Oh, yeah. And of all, you mentioned 2013 and going to the Final Four, and there have been some other really great moments, but I don't know that you can top a national championship. So that,
Sure.
that was definitely the pinnacle.
Sure.
Yeah. Thinking like currently if Wichita State was in the College World Series, how fun that would be.
And the other thing, and some people that followed the team then certainly remember this, but in '88, they got to you had 2 brackets then, and they got to the bracket final against Arizona State, and they were 1 strike away, I don't know how many times, from winning that game and going to the championship. And then it was a 1-game, you had the 2 brackets, then it was a 1-game winner take all. And they had this guy almost struck out about 3 times. He literally let the bat leave his hands, almost threw his bat at a pitch that was outside and fouled that off. Finally got a base hit to tie the game and send in extra innings, and they lost. They come back and play them again the next day and got beat, I think it was 18-1. it was just, I mean, just the most incredible beatdown you've ever seen. And to go through something like that was just unbelievable. And so a lot of those guys came back, and that was kind of the impetus for that next year in '89, was to come back from that and kind of,
Wow.
take care of what they had missed out on,
Right.
and did
Unfinished
that. That
business.
was a driving force all year long for that team.
The unfinished business aspect makes that even better. Makes the championship even better.
I remember we did a video after the World Series, and there was part of an interview with Gene after they had beaten Arkansas in an elimination game. We're going to play Florida State again, and he's saying, they're starting a senior, we're starting a freshman, they, all this stuff. But he said, but I just feel like we're going to find a way to win, and that was kind of how they conducted themselves back then.
Kind of reminds me of the Royals. Are you a Royals fan?
Yeah.
Like the when did they win it? 14?
15.
15? It's like the 14 team where you had Alex Gordon on third base, didn't get it done, come back the next year and win it.
Yeah, and I think probably you could find a lot of examples of that in sports, where that kind of heartbreak, if you have the people back and have the people together, that can be a great impetus for whatever happens after that.
No doubt.
Definitely can. That's a great story.
That is a great story.
Big WSU games that really stick out to me. Obviously the Final Four run. The undefeated loss to Kentucky. Beating Kansas to go to the Sweet 16. And college game day against UNI. How do you prepare prior to calling one of those type games?
No different than I do for any other. I really approach all of them the same. I don't give any less preparation or importance to a game where you're playing the last place team in the conference and you're in first. It's just kind of how you do things. But it's more fun, certainly, to know that you have that kind of matchup coming up. And in one of those, maybe you look a little more for specific one-on-one matchups and things like that might be more important with a potentially really close game or a great opponent than you would if it is a matchup against a team that you're more likely to beat, let's say.
What was did you call the Battle of New Orleans?
Yeah, and that was my first year, my very first year doing.
How about that?
Being the full-time play-by-play broadcaster.
What year was that?
81. Well, ended up in 81. The game right before that was the game with Iowa here in the second round. Wichita State beat Southern University in the first round. Wichita State got to host. And then the next round was Iowa, and back then there were...
What seed were we?
I don't even remember. But back then there were 48 teams, and so some teams got first-round byes. And Iowa had a first-round bye. And they were highly favored. And Wichita State was down 15 or 17 early in the second half. And there have been some extremely loud crowds in that building since then. But I swear to you, there's never been a louder crowd. And part of it was... back then, a lot of the season ticket holders were, older, established, people, and it tended to be like a pro-type crowd sometimes, where you really had to do something to kind of get them up to their feet or really, get their hands together. But for the tournament, it was like first come, first serve for the most part, and so there were a lot of fans there that didn't necessarily get to come to a lot of games. And it was live. I've been in crowds where it was really loud, and then there was a timeout, and they took a breath for a moment, and then they stayed at it right through the timeouts in that second half. And it got so loud in there, it ended up, Iowa Lute Olson called a timeout he didn't have at the end of the game.
Wow.
Technical foul, and that's what Wichita State hit the free throws to go ahead. Right near the end of the game.
Who was on that team?
I bet Antoine Carr was
Antoine Carr,
good way
Cliff
to get people on
Livingston,
the
Randy
feet.
Smithson, the coach's son, made the free throws. Tony Martin, Ozell Jones had been on that team, 6'11" center that was declared ineligible right before the postseason. That was a whole thing that they think Tulsa engineered that had to do with something coming out of high school, that he shouldn't have been eligible immediately. He'd been in school for 2 years and playing and making college grades. But anyway, those were some of the key guys. So
were you calling games when Larry Bird was playing WSU?
I wasn't the play-by-play guy. I saw him play a couple of times. I think it was his junior year. They played in Wichita, and I was at that game. I didn't do the play-by-play, and that was Wichita State played really, really well and beat them, and they were ranked. Of course, they weren't the team they were the next year, but right at the end of the game, Wichita State had like a 5 or 6 point lead, and Indiana State came down. It was going to be a last possession, so the only thing you just want to make sure you don't foul. Everybody just kind of backed away. And Larry dribbled to the top of the circle, threw one up underhanded off the backboard, caught it one-handed, and dunked it to end
Oh, my.
But yeah, he was one of those players, and I did get to see him some. And the other one that I saw a lot in our league, I don't know if you know the name Paul Pressey, who played at Tulsa, but he was there in those early 80s years when Nolan Richardson first came to Tulsa. Brought him with him from Western Texas Junior College. About 6'6", really long arms. And he and Bird were both guys that would do whatever it took on any given night to help their team win the game. He might score 25, or he might have 12 assists and 8 rebounds, and he was tremendous on the pressed all the time, and he was tremendous on the head of that press, and that's how Bird scored a lot. I mean, he led the nation in scoring, but he was a great passer and just such a smart player, and just it was fun to watch him because he was just such, and you didn't expect it when you looked at him, but he was just tremendous.
We're too young to have seen the rivalry between Wichita State and Tulsa, but what do you remember most about that rivalry back in the heyday?
It was truly a rivalry. It encompassed both cities. It wasn't just the players involved, and it kind of got passed down. It started right after World War II when Linwood Sexton was playing at Wichita State, who was African American, and Tulsa really had a Southern exposure type of outlook on things, and they were just beating him up. And it was in a game here, and somewhere later in the game, he got off on a run and he just ran over one of their linebackers that had been roughing him up the worst and just left him trampled on the turf, and they had to help him off the field, and the Wichita fans cheered him being carried off. Well, then that didn't set well with the Tulsa fans, and that's kind of where it all started, and it was back and forth forever. It really started with football, but it carried over into basketball, and there were fights in basketball. My friend, the late Ron Heller, was freshman coach at Wichita State at one time, and went into the stands after some fans at a freshman game down there at Tulsa because some of the stuff they were yelling at Wichita State's players. I mean, just stuff like that. Dave Dahl and I were doing a game at Tulsa back in those years, and Tulsa had a little guard named Herb Suggs, and the two teams had kind of finished warming up, and he walked right past us on the way to the locker room, looked down at our end of the floor, and said, "I hate those guys." That was just when my wife was at the Alumni Association. She had a big football reunion one year, all years, many guys, going way back. And there was a breakfast thing on Saturday morning, and they were split up into different rooms, kind of by eras, thinking they'd enjoy. Well, pretty soon they start intermingling one room to the other, and one of the main questions was, "Did you guys hate Tulsa as much as we did?" So, yeah, there's never been, things got pretty heated with Creighton in basketball toward the end of both teams' stay in the Missouri Valley. Missouri State's been a good rivalry in a couple of sports, but nothing's ever been quite like Tulsa was through any era, I don't think.
Creighton's been a great rivalry. Northern Iowa's been a fun rivalry.
Yeah.
And like you said, Missouri State, when Kyle Weems was there, that was pretty good too. Because he was a Topeka kid. I don't know how he got out of Kansas, but...
Well, they apparently didn't recruit him here that hard, and that was part of his animosity toward Wichita State. He was proven that they...
Well, was it
Same
Carmichael?
with Jackie Carmichael.
Yeah.
He's from Manhattan.
Yeah.
And he ends up at Illinois State. Interesting. But yeah, the Kyle Weems, I remember just
Weems
not
giving
liking
the
him
throat
at all.
slashing gesture and that kind of stuff.
God, I couldn't
I remember
stand
seeing
him.
Weems because we went a couple years to the Missouri Valley Conference tournament in St. Louis, and I remember seeing Weems a couple times in the hotel. But
Yeah, there's been those players in the Valley that just didn't like. Obviously, the Corvers coming through Creighton, McDermott. It's not that I didn't like McDermott. He was just a great player.
Yeah.
Farouk Manesh.
Yep. No, I was.
Who's a great guy, by the way. We've run into him. He's been an assistant coach at a couple of different places. And when we were in Vegas a few years ago, he was there with, I want to say Nebraska maybe, was an assistant there. Bob Hall and I talked to him, had a great conversation
I
with
think
him.
he is the head coach now at Colorado State.
That could be.
I think.
Could be.
Thank you.
Good for him.
Yeah, good for him.
Yeah. No, good guy. And he had his family has a tight connection with the Lambs, Chris and Shannon Lamb at Wichita State, because his mom was a volleyball coach, and she and Shannon Lamb got to know each other way back. So there's all that tie-in, too, with the Farouk Manesh family and the Lambs.
Yeah, those Valley days were special. We were wanting to get at, WC was wanting to get out, and now they're out. But, and you look back on everything with usually a brighter picture than what it was, but there's a lot of nostalgia looking back on those Valley days.
I don't think anybody that I've ever talked to who went to the tournament in St. Louis doesn't miss it. I mean, that got to be something that people really looked forward to. Everybody had their favorite restaurants and activities and all of that stuff. And this conference, and not necessarily throwing darts at this conference, but it just hasn't been that, hasn't become that. And
neither have we. WCU hasn't held up their end of the bargain either. Like the American would be better if we were better, but I don't know. I do miss the Valley and all those. You playing these guys twice a year and you've been playing them for 50 years.
Now I don't miss. I'll be honest with you. I've enjoyed going to Memphis and New Orleans and Orlando, and as opposed to Terre Haute and Normal and
who was the kid?
Cedar Falls in the winter.
Who was the kid Indiana State had? That white point.
Jake Odom.
Yeah, Jake Odom. He was a hell of a player too. Kind of towards the end there.
Were you by any chance at the tournament the year he was a senior and we beat them?
That was an undefeated year.
Yeah, and
I was not there, but
he
remember it well.
We were up enough toward the end of the game that they took him out so he could be acknowledged, by their fans. And Ron Baker walked over behind him, kind of pointed at him, looked up at our fans, and our fans all got up and gave him a big cheer, which I thought was a really classy thing. Just, ultimate respect for a great
deserved.
opponent.
He was a great player.
Yeah.
He was a great player. The Valley had those type of guards. Evansville had a couple guards. Colt Ryan and DJ Ballantyne. They had back-to-back great guards.
I forgot about that.
And the biggest thing that we kind of discovered and experienced once the Shockers moved to the American was around the Valley, practically everybody had a player like that could score even maybe if you guarded him well, was still going to get his points on a given night. And, the best team, maybe Creighton's good teams, a couple of those, but you got to the American and everybody had a couple of those. Just the level of athletes and talent was certainly higher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Man, those Creighton games were so fun, and the Northern Iowa games are so fun. I look back on those so fondly going to Koch Arena, just so loud and the passion. I just hope that comes back.
And Creighton's fans were passionate but nasty. I mean, they were nasty.
You think they'd say the same thing about us?
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. But, one of the most satisfying games I've ever done was McDermott's junior year when the Shockers beat them up there. And people were actually, their people were leaving early. Were leaving the arena a couple of minutes early. Like KU's fans were leaving early in Omaha in the tournament up there. That's pretty satisfying.
We asked Zach Bush this question, and you would have a good perspective on it too. When the era were, the undefeated season and all those prime Marshall years, what was it like going on the road to these Valley schools when the team knows this is their Super Bowl and this is going to be the biggest crowd they've had all year? What was all those atmospheres like during that time period?
Well, that was the thing. I mean, what you just said, you knew it was kind of their Super Bowl, and they would do, the whiteouts or whatever. They'd have more people there than they typically had for a game, and they'd do special events to get people there. And so, it definitely had that feeling. And, with baseball for a long time, it was that way too. When they were the best team in the conference and they'd go in for a series, and you knew the home team didn't really expect to win. If they got one win out of a 4-game series, they'd dogpile on the mound like they just won the World Series or something. So, that's a fun position to be in. The coach, and of course Coach Marshall and Coach Stevenson did a great job of selling the team on that there's some responsibility and some expectation that goes with that you've got to be prepared for that. It's everybody's biggest game.
Right.
Yeah, such a special era of Shocker basketball. That run, 2013 run to the Final Four, I wanted to ask you about that. Obviously, we'll get to the Final Four game itself, but I wanted to talk to you about the Gonzaga game. How was that post-game?
Well, first of all, I don't know. This was out there some at the time, but I don't know if it has stayed in memory as long as it certainly should. After Wichita State beat Pittsburgh, and let me tell you this story. Selection Sunday, the pairings got announced, and shortly after that, I got a call, and it was from these guys with a talk show in Pittsburgh, wanted me to be on their talk show. So I said, sure. So I get on there, and right away, it's really antagonistic. They were pissed that Pittsburgh was as low as an 8 seed, and how did Wichita State get a 9? And who did they play? Who did they beat? And I said, well, DePaul, which the last time I checked is in your conference, and I named a couple of others, and they just kind of kept going in that event. And right at the end, they said, well, how do you see Wichita State's chances? And I said, I would say if the team has an attitude or an outlook like what I've been hearing at the other end of this interview, I like their chances a lot. That's kind of where we left it. And
how good is that?
Early, Trey Woodall was Pittsburgh's point guard and a very good player. And Takale Cotton just absolutely destroyed him. A couple of times early in the game, just picked him, just took it away from him. And I'll never forget, the Shockers were defending at the other end of the floor from us, and he's bringing the ball up, and Takale's down in a stance just waiting for him. And Takale never talked trash, never said anything, but he was just looking at him, and he had this look on his face like, I've got you, and you know I've got you, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, he was just totally in his head. And then we, of course, watched Gonzaga play Southern University, and they won decisively, but you came out of there with the feeling that they're not superhuman. It's not impossible for Wichita State to beat them. But Coach Marshall, the next day at practice, because there was a day in between, they practiced, and the first thing he said to them was something like, that was a great win yesterday. I'm proud of you guys. Now, are you satisfied? And then whatever he said from there was something like, is that it? Is that all you want to accomplish? And of course the answer was no. I thought it was the perfect question. And then I don't remember positively, and I didn't hear it because we were across the floor, but I was told later, I think it was the under 12 timeout in the second half. Wichita State was down 8 at that point to Gonzaga. And he said to them, if I had told you at the beginning of the season you would be down 8 to Gonzaga with under 12 minutes to go with a chance to go to the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament, would you have taken it? And they all said, yeah. And he said, well, then let's get out there and do something about it, And he said he had a knack through that run for saying, the right things at the right time. He really had a good feel for that. You asked me after the game, not that many people went to Salt Lake City. The year before, we had gone to the tournament in Portland and lost to VCU in the first round, and a lot of those people thought, well, I don't know, it's kind of expensive. I might wait and see if they go farther before I go. So there were, it was a few people that went from Wichita and a few people that lived closer to there that came, but the Wichita State bench was kind of at one end of the floor, and the Shocker fans that were there were right behind them, and then right around the corner, facing the court in the end, was the band. And after the game, the team shook hands and everything. They kind of came walking over there, and the band started into "You Don't Want to Go to War with the Shockers."
Yeah, hit the music.
And the all the players and the coaches, everybody lined up on the end line in front of the band and were singing and dancing along with that. And the fans that were there were singing. And it was the coolest, most spontaneous, joyful moment in that whole run to the Final Four that year. It was just really cool.
How cool is that?
That's terrific.
You brought up that 2012 team. That team was so good. Such a fun team. They didn't win the conference tournament, and they were a 5 seed coming out of the Valley. That just shows how great of a season that they had.
Yeah, and they were so close, but they got to give VCU credit. They knew, they kind of knew. They took away Joe Ragland. They weren't going to let him beat them, and guarded Teray, and we end up with Garrett Stutz taking a 3 from the top, which he was capable of making, but, came down to a last shot. It wasn't quite the shot that they wanted.
But then we stole Carl Hall.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
Yeah, another great player.
The other thing that from that Final Four run was the pep rallies that my wife put on got bigger before every game as we went through. And by the time we got to Los Angeles, that was really big. And, they won the Ohio State game.
That was such a great game.
And I had thought about, I have never, ever, but this one time, planned something that I was going to say in a game. It was always spontaneous. But I had just thought about, what if Wichita State ever made it to a Final Four? And it just happened that they had the lead. All Ohio State could do was throw up some desperation thing from half court. So it wasn't like it's going to go down to a last shot. And when the horn sounded, I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, say it slowly and savor it. Wichita State is going to the Final Four for the first time in 48 years. And then we went to a break, and I'm sitting there going, we're going to the Final Four. Dave and Bob are on either side. And I said, do you understand what's going on here? Which is a stupid question. Of course they did, but it was just like, I was just surreal. I'm going, we're going to the frickin' Final Four. And then while we were doing our post-game show, because we were there, after anybody else hardly was in the building, and they had a meeting at the end of the court of the people that were ushers and stuff. They all were wearing red sport coats, had their meeting, and then as the meeting broke up, several of them were walking down the middle of the court going out, and they started singing, "You Don't Want to Go to War with the Shockers." We just laughed like crazy.
What a special moment, not just for the team, but for you and Bob and Dave.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, you do what we do, and I don't know, maybe if you do it at Duke or North Carolina or Kansas, you expect it every once in a while, but, you just never, no idea if that ever might happen for us. And so, yeah, it was, and to be at a Final Four, just the scope of it, the size of it is just absolutely amazing. I don't know that it's something I'd want to negotiate all the time as a fan. I mean, it's crowded and crazy, but just to be there and get a feel for what that's like was pretty cool also. I don't know if Zach told you when he was here, but all the teams had a practice time like somewhere else at a high school or something where they had more of a real practice, but they all had to have, I don't know if it's like 30 minutes or an hour at the dome that was open to the public. So it was kind of a glorified shoot around. They, did some shooting drills, but it wasn't really much of a practice. And Zach Bush is flying around throwing down dunks all over the place. And,
he didn't tell us that.
Yeah, walk on. And there were probably 25 to 30,000 people at these glorified shoot-arounds.
Wow.
It was just that kind of interest in what was going on there.
I was going to ask you, going into the Final Four, what was it like going into the Georgia Dome? How big it is, and you're thinking, holy cow, we're about to play in the Final Four.
There was a staging area, like the media room, if you will. It was a huge area where you could store your stuff. Guys could sit down and work at their computers and that sort of thing. They had food and all that. And then to walk from there to the court, I swear I'm probably exaggerating, but it felt like we walked a mile to get from that room out to the court itself. That's how big that building was.
Probably did. It's a football stadium.
Yeah. So that in itself was pretty amazing. And then, you turn around and there's Lute Olson was a couple of rows behind us. So we went to the airport when we were leaving, and Bill Russell, the great, San Francisco and Celtic star, was in line just a little bit ahead of us at the airport. And just, you go to a Final Four, and there are all these famous people that are there.
Yeah, special event.
I know. I almost couldn't believe it until I heard Jim Nantz start calling the lineups. It's like, holy cow, he's calling my team.
Yeah.
Those are players I've watched all year.
Yeah.
It's such a special moment. Man, I look back on that so fondly.
Yeah. And we got screwed. We should have won it.
Played well.
Throw that out
played
there.
well.
The loose ball that Baker pulled away, he hits Malcolm for a breakaway layup, and they call it back, say it was a held ball, and it was ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember hating that as well. I remember hating that.
And we were handling their press, and I'm saying we and all this, on the air.
I was saying
we all do. We all do.
I kind of have to. The Shockers and they, but yeah.
You're more of a we than we are. We say we.
But we were handling their press, and Patino kept yelling at the officials. He finally went down to the scores table and slammed his fist down on the scores table. Should have been a technical. And instead, they all of a sudden start, if we'd score or they'd score, they'd take the ball and come set it on the end line and start counting. Like we had to hurry up to get it in. So we didn't have as much time to adjust to their press. That's just.
Huh.
And then they had the kid that had broken his leg.
Yeah, Kevin Ware.
And they kept showing him on the sideline on the jumbotron, and that's not right. Something was definitely said, because they definitely did not do any of that in the championship game when they played Michigan. So. Anyway.
Yeah, that was such a tough loss.
Tough loss, but man, you gotta count your blessings. I mean, what a run.
And Louisville ended the season winning, 14 or 17 in a row or something like that, and that was the closest game they had in that whole run, was the game with us in the semifinals.
Well, and the white guard just lit us up.
Luke
and I'm sure he was a great player, and maybe I only know this because it was against Wichita State, but it didn't feel like he did that every game.
No, he didn't have another game like that all year.
Right.
That was just kind of...
But if you're a Gonzaga fan that year, you're saying the same thing about Wichita State.
Yeah, we made, 14 to 28 threes or whatever. Yeah, that didn't happen, so yeah.
Or think of KU fans. Evan Wessel goes crazy that game. It's like, what other game did Evan Wessel go crazy from 3 in?
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, it takes a real professional to stay steady on the mic after a tough loss. I think about that 2014 Kentucky loss to end the undefeated season. How do you handle that, and how hard was that post game?
Well, I've done it so long. I wouldn't say it's gotten easier. It's just you kind of learn how you have to handle those situations and try to make them as little of a downer as possible. But that was so, even more so than right after the game, coming back from St. Louis, it was the weirdest feeling I think I've ever had, that they lost one game and the season's over. That's it. You lose one game and you're done. That just, and of course I understand it was in the tournament and all that, but it just didn't feel like it made sense. It felt like there should still be more to play. That was, and I'll say this, I've told people this too. The best college basketball game, regardless of the outcome, that I've ever been directly part of. That was just an absolutely incredible college basketball game.
It truly was.
It was. We were there for that one as well. Were. And yeah, you hear that from other people. Calipari said something similar, and I've always thought that as well.
CBS named it the best college basketball game of the year and stuff like that.
I remember Stephen A. on First Take on that next Monday, Stephen A. Smith saying, because he picked Wichita State to win it all, and he's like, I don't hate my pick. That was a fantastic basketball game.
Something else happened up there that I've never seen before. When we played Cal Poly the previous round, there had been 2 games prior to that, and that was a session, and they cleared out the building, and then the other 2 games were a second session. You had to have a separate ticket. And somehow they screwed that all up, and people couldn't get in.
They did.
We tipped off the Cal Poly game, and there was nobody in that building. And here's this huge arena at an NCAA tournament game, and there's nobody there. It was just eerie. And they started filing in pretty shortly after that, but that was just the strangest thing ever, too.
Yeah, we didn't get into the under 16. I remember that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the lines were so backed up, and there just wasn't enough security, I don't think.
Yeah, it was just another really strange memory.
Yeah, it seemed like single file going in, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally forgot about that. So, you've been through WSU's time in the Valley and the American. Is there a storyline or rivalry that you thought didn't get enough attention? You know, we always hear about Wichita State, Creighton, the McDermotts. Is there anything that you think back on that was really special that kind of went under the cover?
Oh, wow. Not we mentioned Missouri State earlier. That was a little more in baseball even than in basketball. Although, I don't know if you remember in that undefeated season, Wichita State won a game down there that could have certainly been the end of it.
We talked to Zach about that.
And the thing about that one, I'm trying to remember what it was at halftime, but it was a bunch. It was 18 or something like that. And then they started the first couple of minutes of the second half. The Shockers started to come back, and you thought, they're cutting the lead. And you're thinking, okay, they're going to cut through this. And then it went back up to like 20 or 22 or something about 4 or 5 minutes in. And to come back and win that, and there was a play right at the end. I think in regulation to maybe get it to overtime, Fred drove the lane. There was contact. He scooped it up, made it, and they called a block instead of a charge. And people in Springfield will still get in your face if you bring that up.
Zach brought that up.
Yeah, that was, and I don't know if it was the right call or not, but that was a huge game-turning call. And maybe you don't get that if you're not undefeated and playing on the road and all that kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah, there's been some moments at Missouri State. I remember Teray Murray going into the crowd on like an and one and getting shoved. Like, man, there was some bad blood there.
Yeah, they had a professional sign maker that made signs for them they'd bring to the games. They were really well done, you know. But the one was Wichita is not a state. And, you know, it's funny the first time you saw it. And then after 20 years of that, you know, you're going, okay,
they had shirts.
Getting a little old now.
Yeah.
I think they all had shirts that said that. I think I've seen them.
Now, one year, this was back when Randy Smithson was coaching and Maurice Evans left the team at one point, and we went down there right after that, and they had signs that said, "There's no Mo in the Mo Valley." So I thought that was pretty clever.
That is.
But now, to your question, Bradley, you know, Bradley was always an interesting series, always a pretty good rivalry just because it was one of the oldest rivalries. And at times, it was funny how it seemed like at times when Wichita State was good, they were good, and so they were both contending teams, and there was that. And then when the Shockers were down, a lot of those times they were kind of down. And so it was only an important game because both teams needed a win, but it just kind of cycled like that with both programs. I don't know if you know this story, but in 1982-83, Wichita State played Bradley here for the first of the two games. It's pretty early in the conference schedule. And that's the year that Xavier led the nation in rebounding for the first time. And Dick Versace, their coach, went back home after that game, and on his coach's show on TV said something about, McDaniel's a really good player, but I think they're padding his statistics. There's no way he had that many rebounds against us. Well, the Illinois State and Bradley hate each other. The Illinois State SID made sure that word got down to Wichita State, and a friend of Dave Dahl's father-in-law heard it and let him know. So we told X when we were on the way up there to play them a second time about all of that. He literally paced up and down the aisle of the plane the entire flight going up there. I can't wait to play those guys. I can't wait to play those guys again. And he had 17 points and 13 rebounds at halftime of that game. And for the last, whatever it was, 6 games of his career, averaged like 35 and 17 against them. And Versace kept saying, I'm convinced. I totally believe. I'm convinced. He didn't have to prove it to me. But
this might be an unfair question, but do you have a favorite player or the player that you think was best since you've been calling WSU basketball?
I've thought about that a lot. I get asked that, every once in a while. Certainly, the X-Man would have to be up there near the top of the list. He was just so tough and played so hard. Steve Harris at Tulsa, who was a great player, played in the NBA for a number of years, said everybody during a game will take a few seconds off at least, kind of backpedal down court on defense, a little slower, catch your breath, Not him. He said he never slows down, never lets up. I've never seen anything like him. And he was a leader, if anything, through intimidation. There's no way anybody on his team wanted to face him if they weren't giving their best and playing their hardest. And
was he 6'10"?
he was more like, he was listed at 6'8" when
wow.
he was here, but he was more like 6'6" and a half.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was relentless about rebounding. The year he led the nation in scoring, he never wanted to know how many points he had. He just always wanted to know how many rebounds he had after a game. And you could do a rebounding video and just show clips of him, because he could be on one side of the basket, the shot would go to the other side, and he'd spin and work and try to fight to get to the other side to get to it. He went after every rebound. And just amazing from that standpoint. So he was fun to be around. He was fun to watch play. I mean, he'd certainly be up there. But Fred VanVleet is way, way, way up there on my list. When he came in as a freshman, initially, I'd watch him and I'd think, he's definitely going to be a good point guard. He's got those, and the first time we interviewed him, he had a pretty good game against somebody, so we had him as our star of the game. And it was like talking to a 35-year-old assistant coach or something. Dave and I are just looking at each other like, can you believe this guy? This is amazing. And the one thing is, two things. His freshman year, he'd come in occasionally, and maybe the guy who was guarding was a little quicker or something. He'd get burned a couple of times. You think, well, he'll learn from that. He'll watch the video. Shoot, the next time he came back in the game, he'd been watching the guy and figuring it out and adjusted and was able to, to make the adjustment and let that happen. And then his shot was just okay. And you were thinking, well, he's going to be, a point guard, a true point guard, may not ever be much of a scorer or much of a shooter. And then I'm watching him during warm-ups and in practice, and it's looking a little better all the time. And I finally said to one of the assistants, I think Greg Heyer, I said, is it just me or is Fred's shot getting better? And he said, it's getting better. He said, we just made a couple little tweaks technically, but he said he's in the gym all the time working on it, just works on it constantly, and it's getting better and better. And, of course, it did, and that's continued on into the NBA. I mean, he's a really good three-point shooter in the NBA, and that's just because he's worked his tail off. He was best leader. Chris Jans, was an assistant here, said that Fred's senior year he'd had contact from 3 or 4 NBA scouts that knew him, that he knew, asking about him. And he said, look, I know all the reasons why he shouldn't make it. He's a little small. He's not quick enough. He's this and that. But he said, the game is slow for him. He said, I've never been around a player who sees things the way he does and anticipates before anybody else. And he said, it's just amazing how, and that's him. The first year he was in the NBA, we moved to the American, and we had a game in Orlando, and I just happened to look to see if the Magic were at home the night we got in, and they were playing Toronto. So I got a hold of Dominic Acone with the staff, and he got tickets for everybody. And we went to the game, and you're watching him warm up, and he looks like a midget out there with those NBA guys. And then he gets in the game, and it's all the same stuff he used to do. He'd be guarding somebody and kind of watch them. Next thing you know, he reaches in and slaps it out of their hands and steals it, or he makes a head fake and goes by a guy and then scoops it up in front of him, lays it in as the guy's fouling him from behind, makes a three-point play. And it was just like he's already figured this out,
He's wicked smart.
He's always very humble and everything. So yeah, he's way up there on my list of favorites, certainly. But and there have been others for other reasons. I really hit it off with Malcolm Armstead in that one season that he played. He was so unselfish. He had a lot to do with Fred's development. He was all about winning, and just there have been guys like that off and on over the years that
Yeah, you forget, you don't forget about Armstead, but he does kind of get forgotten when you think of everyone else, but they're not in the final. They don't make that run without Malcolm Armstead. Incredible year he had at Wichita State.
I know, I talk about it all the time. The run of guards that Greg Marshall had at Wichita State was just something to behold.
The first time I saw Ron Baker, he came in as a walk-on and was going to redshirt. Mm-hmm. But that summer they had a trip to Brazil. They were making a trip to Brazil, so they got to have a few practices before they went. And I came in to watch a practice, and they were playing full court, and he was playing against David Kiles, who was just super athletic. And I'm watching this kid, and he's not giving up anything at all athletically to this guy, really holding his own. And they had a break, and Greg came over, and I said, "Are you kidding me? You got this kid to walk on?" And he said, "Our starting guards next year will probably be two guys that are paying their own way to go to school this year, Ron and Malcolm Armstead, who's transferring from Oregon, and we don't have a scholarship for either one." I mean, sure enough, of course, the next year they were the starters.
Wow. Yeah, the Baker story is pretty unique. Just the guard play that Marshall had, dating back from Clevin Hanna to Joe Ragland to Malcolm Armstead to Fred VanVleet to Landry Shamet, that is like
Takale. Don't forget Takale in that conversation.
Yeah. There's like 10 years,
but just point guard.
Yeah,
of excellent guard play.
Oh yeah, and that's really, to this day, that's really the key to college basketball is guard play and shooters and yeah.
Yeah, I think Fred, at least for me, obviously I haven't seen a lot of the, you see video of some of the other guys who have their jerseys hanging in the rafters, but Fred's number one for me. But I wanted to ask you, the year Xavier McDaniel led the country in points and rebounds in the same season one year, correct?
That's correct.
How was that? How was watching him that year?
Oh, it was amazing. And just every game came out and did it. And like I say, the thing that was great about him was he didn't care how many points he scored. He was not a gunner. He was not point happy. He just wanted to get his rebounds, and they ran stuff for him, but he got a lot off the offensive glass, but he was relentless. We were going to play Tulsa one time, and Bruce Vanley was their center. He was 6'10", about 250 pounds. And somewhere in the article, I guess they'd ask him about McDaniel, and he said, "I don't know what all the fuss is about. He's just the best pusher in the league." So we showed that to X, and X said, "What's he crying about? If I was 6'10" and 250, I'd get every rebound." We were also playing them, and there was an altercation at one end of the floor. The Tulsa player ended up on the floor, and they're running down the floor, and Nolan came out on the court yelling at X, "You hit my player, you hit my player." And he said, "If you don't sit down, I'm going to hit you too." Watching him was a show in itself.
Man, what a unique time. I really wish I could have seen him play at WSU.
The other thing that kind of forgotten, and I'll see a little bit of video sometimes, they'll bring some out. Those guys, Carr and Livingston and McDaniel, and Ron Heller had mentioned this to me one time. Guys that size that could run like they could. Cliff would grab a defensive rebound and outlet and sometimes be down finishing on the break at the other end after just one or two passes. And that was just, they were amazing athletes to watch, all of them. Antoine could dunk from practically anywhere. I mean, he'd go up sometime, you think he's going to make a little finger roll, it'll fall away, and he'd just keep reaching and dunk the ball. And funny story there, too. Gene Smithson had a policy. He told him, dunks are great. You can get a dunk, that's fine. But if you can lay the ball in off the glass and you try to dunk it and miss, you're coming out of the game. And Antoine did one time. He had an easy layup, easy play, and he slammed the dunk off the heel, and he never even looked. Just put his head down and started for the bench, and Gene had a guy going to the scores table.
That's old school. That's a great story.
Antoine's another all-timer. He had over 2,000 points at WSU, I believe.
Yeah, he stayed for the 4 years and got better and better. And the other thing that really came on about him, his last couple of years, I don't know that he was as much that way. He was always confident, even a little cocky. But as a junior and senior, he became that guy that wanted the ball at the end of the game. He wanted to take the last shot, and he made some big shots or big plays. And he was hard to stop because he was so big and strong. He could shoot it, but he also could make plays close to the basket, just overpower people. So, yeah, he was a great, great player.
Man, I love talking about the WSU history. You know, I just love the program, love the team. So it's always a blast to do so. Something that'd be beneficial for us to know, what's the biggest lesson you've learned about connecting with an audience?
That's a great question. I guess always try to be receptive to what you hear as far as, you know, people like or don't like. I mean, if you're hearing, I don't know that I've ever experienced this, but I think if you were hearing a lot that, he does too much of this or too much of that, I think you have to be cognizant of that. And then I've never tried to be the story myself. I'm telling the story. I've never been tried to be the reason people listen to games. It's because they want to hear about Wichita State and what's going on with them and present things about the players and the coaches and stuff that they'll find interesting. So I think that's part of it also. I've always tried to, when people come up to me, be appreciative that they listen and they follow the Shockers and they're loyal fans and all that kind of thing. So I certainly think that's part of it. And to that end, I think one of the things I discovered a long time ago, the key to being a good interviewer is to be a good listener. Because all too often people will go into an interview with a list of questions, and you can tell, they just go through the list of questions. And sometimes you'll get an answer you weren't anticipating. And that can lead you in a direction you never even thought about that was a lot more interesting than the next question you had to ask. So that's why I've always tried to do that also, to listen when I'm talking to somebody. And some guys are really good at leading that way. Chris Lamb, the volleyball coach, will constantly lead me in a direction I'd never even thought about, or Brent Chemnitz when he was the pitching coach. And so, I think I think that helps you with the fans too. They hear things that are interesting, and they can tell you're giving your guest, your interviewee, a chance to be the thing, be the interview, not yourself, kind of thing.
That's great advice.
That is great advice.
So you're heading into your 46th season.
Yeah.
Wow. How are you feeling about this year's team?
Right. It's so much harder than it used to be. It's all new every year. And what I see, I think, is pretty good. But it's all new. You haven't seen him against anybody else. So it's a learning process every year. That's what's really different about it, is pretty much all the teams. The teams I work most directly with, volleyball has some returning regulars, but it's more of the key players are transfers and a couple of freshmen. Men's basketball, women's basketball, softball, baseball are all practically brand new teams, or certainly greatly so. And so it's just hard to tell. I went and watched the baseball team play Nebraska, and that's not going to tell you a whole lot, and you saw some potential there, but hard to tell from that how good they're going to be, just from, even though it was against another opponent. So that's the part that's a lot different than it used to be. You had a team, you talked about the 2012 team. We go into 13, you knew what was coming back from that team and how good they were, and all right, these are the new pieces, but now it's all new, and how's it all fit together?
Sure. Yeah, it'll be great to see PJ Kuznard on the bench again.
One of my favorites. Absolutely love PJ. And he and I have kept in touch over the years since he's been gone, and whenever he's come back or he's come to a game in Houston or whatever. So, I'm really happy about him being back here.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It'll be here before we know it.
Paul Mills mentioned to me, I told him when he hired him, I said, I'm just so excited about him being here. And he said, well, he said he is so passionate about Wichita State, loves Wichita State, just a great fit. I mean, it's great to have somebody like that on our staff. So
yeah, that's neat.
That's awesome. I can't wait for this season. You got anything, Troy?
No, my last question was going to be what your outlook, if you've read the tea leaves at all about this upcoming year, but
Mike, you got anything for us?
Interesting. Well, it's an interesting schedule. Like you go, the tournament in the Bahamas. You got St. Mary's, and I'm trying to think. Even South Florida, it's one of the favorites in our conference. Could be there. Western Kentucky, some good teams, and I think it's a good schedule. I mean, I think it's one that'll test them, but have some interesting games, some fun games to see, and have a pretty good idea going into conference of what they're going to be like. So
we're hoping for the best.
Yeah, it's like I say, I think there's a chance to be pretty good, but we'll start finding that out pretty soon, I guess.
Yeah, it is right around the corner.
We will. Well, Mike, you got anything for us?
This has been fun. I appreciate you guys. Obviously, you are not only passionate about it, but you do your homework and you ask great questions, and so it's fun to be on here. I appreciate what you guys are doing.
Thank you, sir. It's a real treat, and to hear you share your stories, and in a world that's constantly changing and evolving, it's really nice to have a constant in our lives, which is what we've had with you calling games all these years.
Yeah,
thank you.
It is. So, you throw the radio on WHU, we know exactly how that's going to sound.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So thank you. This has been a blast and a real treat. So
maybe we should do it again
a treat
sometime.
for us.
We'd love to.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.